Now, an A-type personality is what, we call alphas now, like this creep Andrew Tate and others. That's not an alpha. That's like the furthest thing from an alpha that there is. That's
Why do you say that? Why do you think that?
because there's no real strength or power there at all. That's bluster.
Hmm.
It's puffing up bluster. So I wrote a piece called Alpha-Based Leadership. Alphas are actual alphas. And if you watch them, this is what started me when I was young, was, raising horses and stock and animals, et cetera, and watching this behavior and then reading things, et cetera. Um, if you look at the actual alpha, they are example-based leadership. They don't use bluster. They don't make threats. They're not beating people up. They're not puffing themselves up at all. If you look at the alpha, they're usually pretty mellow, pretty
Hmm.
calm, laid back. If they ever do have to, strike at something or use some force or aggression, it's very precise, it's very deliberate, and then it's over.
Yeah.
They don't, right? And they don't puff themselves up. They don't anything. The only time they ever puff themselves up is when they're facing another alpha and they have to fight. And oh, by the way, that's alpha males and females. Alpha females also don't walk around peacocky.
Well, how would you describe an alpha female? Oh, well, I
The
like
healthy
what
matriarch, the healthy
Yep.
matriarchs, like we were talking about,
Hmm. Wow.
right? The healthy matriarch is someone who understands the importance of partnering with an alpha male and also understands the organic status hierarchies, which is what we're really talking about, and how to, if you look at alpha females like wolves, like I grew up around wolves and studying wolves, et cetera, high up in the mountains in the north of the United States, northwest of the United States. If you look at an alpha female, when there's a fight, she'll duck down beneath him. And people used to think that's her cowering. No, no, no. She's protecting his throat.
Hi guys, welcome back to Views from Underground, and I'm here now with EM Burlingame, and I've read two of EM's books, one of which is called The Art of Being a Man. Fantastic book, fantastic guidebook to any young man out there who wants a guide or directions towards being a man, being masculine in today's age, especially today, because everybody is trying to keep masculinity down, and just keep you on a couch, I guess, and inactive and with the wrong principles. But I'm going to be talking tonight with EM about a different book. It's called The Eternal War. Fantastic book. I really do highly recommend this book. It's a fantastic book, and it's a book that you're going to have to take your time with. It's a very erudite, very thoughtful book. Anyways, Ian, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Ian, I just want to talk to you uh, about the Eternal War. It seems as if it's like you're giving an interpretation of how the world works fundamentally, how we interact with the world and each other, I guess. You go into this with talking about the responsibles and the resentfuls. Do I have that right when you with
Yeah.
that dichotomy? Could you go
Yeah.
into that, please?
Yeah. Excuse me. Um, there are two fundamental personality types that I've seen since I was young, having been born to one of them and myself being the other. And you can see this play out at every scale, and not just in humans, but in primates. You can see it in wolves. You can see it in all, social pack guys. I watched it in horses. Is probably first place I kind of picked it up because we raised horses when I was younger. Um, there are those whose base motivation in pretty much all things is envy, and they're envious of all kinds of things. And that envy unchecked becomes resentment, and that resentment unchecked becomes malevolence. That malevolence unchecked becomes evil, genuine evil.
Hmm.
And yet on the other side, you can have the same same people raised to or born to the exact same circumstances and situation, like my younger brother and I, and he was on the resentful side, but for whatever reason, I've always been grateful. Even when things were really bad when we were young, I've just been grateful and same as others, right? And that gratitude develops into a sense of responsibility for self and other. And everything, as I look more and more and more and more at social, at people, they are either the one of these, they're either just all envious or all grateful, or there's some mix of the combination of the two, and that's in the middle, which are these adoptables that the resentfuls and the responsibles are always fighting over.
Hmm. Can you, yeah, are the adoptables, what are they? What is their relationship to the categorization of resentfuls and responsibles? I have the clear idea of what a responsible is, what a resentful is. I can identify those types in
Uh,
my own life very easily. In fact, the way you characterize them is very useful, because nowadays you can almost make it too complicated.
yes,
You're looking at nuances, and you're looking at different behaviors, and you're saying, well, that guy's all right, or she's a.
uh,
But with this categorization, it kind of puts everything more into place. But what is an adoptable? What is the adoptables relationship to these two categorizations?
yeah. So great articulation and question. The whole reason I sat down some years ago and I had a lot of help from my friend Tucker Max, the author and public figure, et cetera. In terms of he spent hours with me listening to my thoughts and ideas and helping me shape them. But um, the very reason I sat down to write the book and it really came down to resentfuls and responsibles and the adoptables is to cut through all of the labels and descriptors and all of the other things that keeps us from base reality. And now with respect to the adoptables are they have envy in some aspects of their life, and that changes as they go through life. And they have gratitude in some aspects of their life, and that changes as they go through life. And so they're this, far more complex weave of resentments and responsibilities, and that's an ever adaptive, changing thing. And the eternal war is really over how many of the adoptables can the resentfuls win over to their side and on the responsible side is how many genuine grievances can we address in the world so we can get more of them on the responsible side.
Mhm,
They're the malleable masses in the middle, as I call them,
mhm.
the 50%. Yeah.
What would you say, about, well, like, is there a certain percentage of resentfuls? Is there a certain percentage of responsibles, or is it half and half? I don't know. What would you say the
No,
percent?
it's about so the ones that are just envy, resentment, the ones that are just gratitude, responsibility, is about 30% resentfuls. This is work that goes back to McKinsey, but it also comes from neural studies and other things. And there's only about 20% responsibles. And the resentfuls are all out resentful. You can see it in little kids. You can see it in kids 2, 3, 4 years of age already, on both sides. Um, resentfuls are just all in from the time they're little. They don't think in any other way or operate or responsibles are interesting because living in a world that is generally skewed towards resentment because that's how power systems work, right? Is to keep as many people on the resentment side of things so that power can accumulate to the resentfuls and resentfuls or hijack systems, institutions and systems. Responsibles are kind of a gradient where they don't tend to take up their full acceptance of being responsible, fully responsible till they're in their, really it's much of that is men, but some women too. But women responsibles, which there's fewer of them of that 20%, but they're there too. They tend to take up that responsibility around childbirthing and child rearing age, whenever that is for them.
Mhm.
And so, which could be early. Sometimes it's women 16, 17, 18 years old, and sometimes it's women in their early 30s or mid 30s. Men males, depending, some can learn it, pick it up early because of family, etc., but some don't. A lot of men today who are on the responsible side, fully on the responsible side, don't start to pick up that till they're in their early 30s. And it doesn't really become really firmly locked in as, okay, this is who and what I am, and I'm just going all in, and I'm going to fight the war, and these resentfuls, I'm going at, I'm going to do my best to push back. That doesn't generally really kick in until a man's in his early 40s, and it doesn't finalize, fully actualize till he's in his 50s. And that's an interesting thing. The Chinese, ancient Chinese statement is that a man doesn't become a man until he's in his 50s.
No, that's good to know. So
Yeah.
I definitely feel I'm going to be turning 50 this year, and I definitely
Mhm.
feel that I'm at my that I'm at my best now, and is great. When they say you peak at your 35, well, I feel great now. I feel the
Yeah.
way I think and the way I feel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, is this what you mean when women are in the responsibles? Is this what you mean about being in the women in the right matriarchy? I also read
Yes. Yeah.
guys, I would also invite you to read Ian's Substack, because I read his Substack, and I know you had a good post there about the matriarchy lately. It was a very insightful post. Is that what you mean? These are the
Yes.
response.
Yeah. These are the matriarch, the healthy matriarchs are the responsible women.
What would
And
define their character? What would be?
matchmaking. Their fundamental orientation is towards identifying good quality men and linking them up with good quality women and making sure the match happens, and then helping that match, and then bringing resources, relationships, and other things to help bring that together. And then um, during the 7 year, 10 year, 20 year, or 25 year itches, et cetera, when couples tend to run into, historically into difficulties, also helping shepherd and making sure that they last through that.
Mhm.
So healthy matriarchs are about one thing and one thing only, and that is the continuity of assets across generations. And the continuity of assets is not a thing that's real assets is always about relationships. It's not about all this modern banking and finance and all this other nonsense that actually itself doesn't work unless you know the right attorneys and you have the right accountants and right, even there, it's all relational. But, historically, and the few healthy matriarchs that are remaining, very few, unfortunately, are in the English speaking world right now. Um, now that we lost the great one, Her Majesty the Queen, um, the real power of matrilineal lines, which are the lines that go unbroken for, like the House of Garcetta is 900 years old, unbroken, mother to daughter. And those daughters don't all marry into nobility. They marry, heads of large companies, et cetera. And what comes with those women? Relationship, legitimacy, relationships, and assets, right? Um, and the man. So point being is that those few healthy matriarchs we have are all about relationship management because that's asset management across generations.
Mhm. Wow. What is the eternal war? Yeah. What is it?
I mean, it depends on what, Einsteinian relativism, when Einstein was talking about relativity, he didn't just mean light or the speed of light. What Einstein meant is that where it was deeper physics is that whatever scale, energetic level, orientation, et cetera, you're looking at, you're going to see something different, right? You're going to be in a different universe. So to your question about the eternal war, what is it? Well, it depends on the scale that you're looking at. But at its base root, it's entropy and disequilibrium, imbalance in thermal distributions and energy distributions. It's this constant, steady decay to entropy that is just built in from the base subatomic particle level all the way up through the most complex things that we build. And that at that scale, in that relativistic orientation, is like, okay, well, everything's trying to decay, yes, but as you get to the higher levels of structures, dissipative structures,
Mhm.
um, human beings, societies, civilizations, etc., you wind up having resentfuls that rise up into positions of power there, and they take that natural entropy disequilibrium and they pour jet fuel on it, and they are constantly just parasitically living off of everyone and everything, which accelerates the entropic nature of things, the entropic decay and coming apart of things. That's the eternal war,
Mhm.
right?
And
So
what
at the level of physics, it's just entropy. The level of chemistry, it's, second law of thermodynamics and irreversibility. But at the level of society and humanity, it's these human parasites that get in there, hijack institutions, and just accelerate the destruction of everything through this over-parasitism.
and would you say, and so the infinite game, what is that? What is that in relation to the eternal war? The infinite game is what we're involved in, right? Is that?
Right. Yeah. So it's the responsibles counter to the eternal war, which you can never win, right? It's eternal. But the only counter to the eternal war, this intention parasitism and hijacking of systems, institutions, beliefs, belief systems, etc., and right down to cognition and consciousness. The only counter to that is not war. I mean, you have to be able to do that, but you have to innovate. You have to constantly innovate new structures from out of the decay, from out of the collapse. You have to constantly, you know, develop and articulate and bring into being thermodynamically and energetically sustainable, doable solutions that address genuine grievances. And the only way to do that is through play. This extraordinarily capable adaptiveness that we have through play and gameplay. And tied into that is, when we were little kids and we were making up games, on the playground, as we were kids, the game wasn't fun unless we were bringing more kids into it. We were figuring out how to adapt the game and the rules, and there were kids at different capabilities, and so we'd adapt some little rule over here so that the kids that weren't quite as good at that could come in, and they still had a place to play in the game. And this is our the reality of our social nature, again, particularly for boys, because this is really one of the things that's deeply wired into healthy boys and men. The counter to the eternal war is not to fight war better, because you can't. You're up against the most powerful force in the universe, entropy, right? And
Mhm.
decay. The only way you can do it is the way that single-celled life has done it for 4.5 billion years on this planet, and that is what's called niche fitting, right? Metabolic niche fitting. And that is this constant exploration of new ways in which to do things.
Mhm.
Even if, like extremophiles, single cell forms of life that have figured out how to live in sulfur pits or 1800 degree, temperature, deep core earth stuff, or, just straight up toxic chemical things that would break our cells down. These extremophiles have playing the game, exploring, space, have adapted themselves in such a way they can survive in that environment. Well, that's the infinite game. We're constantly, constantly, constantly playing, trying to adapt to the resentfuls, adapt to the environment we're having to move in, that the resentfuls and their war is creating.
Mhm. Is there ever a danger that the responsibles being at 20%, that they could be completely wiped out? Or would that go against the laws of the
No, it's
universe?
happened. It happened. It's happened. So um, I took all this study back over, I did all this study for over 50 years, all these things, piecing all this together to get it down. And then
Mhm.
my friend Tucker wanted me to write a more extensive book than I did. And I thought, no, let's do a primer, make it as simple as people, reduce it as much as possible, but no more, right?
Mhm.
I think is Rutherford, Lord Rutherford's statement. Um, no, there have been times where the responsibles got too comfortable, they got complacent, and the resentfuls changed the environment enough that it wiped the responsibles out.
Mhm.
I mean,
Well,
that's how we've lost, that's how the great civilizations gone, lost to history or gone. That's exactly what happened.
mhm. But then that life force, that drive of the responsibles, I'm assuming that it transmits to somewhere else because it can't you can't if it's coming from the universe, it's not you can't really kill it, no? Yeah,
Well, no, it's a great question. What winds up happening is the resentfuls then destroy themselves because when the resentfuls, if the resentfuls succeed in their eternal war, wiping out, excuse me, the responsibles by bringing enough adoptables over to their side and creating an environment where the only incentives are negative incentives, right?
mhm,
Um, what happens then is the resentfuls wind up destroying themselves too, because the only ones who are creating the energy metabolism, right, the metabolic systems that provided for nutrient distribution and energy create, all the structure creation and all this other stuff were the responsibles and their adoptables. And so once they wipe out the responsibles and their adoptables, the whole system collapses. And then what happens to your question is responsibles from some other domain or system or locale um, move into the available space there and begin to develop, metabolic. And when I say metabolic, I don't just mean cellular metabolism, but a economy is a metabolism,
mhm,
right? Economy is a metabolism of metabolism, and that's the different jobs that we're doing to create productivity, right?
mhm,
So you can look at a business, a company, in a specific industrial niche as a form of metabolism, a type of metabolism.
mhm,
Productivity of a certain type is metabolism. So what generally happens is if the resentfuls succeed in that space, area, metabolic domain, et cetera, productivity domain, et cetera, they wind up wiping themselves out. And then from the detritus that's there and what's left, some other responsibles from somewhere else will come in and create what, dissipative structures that work.
mhm. Yeah, it reminds me, it's like I said at the beginning of, did you ever read that book, The Birth of Tragedy by Nietzsche?
I haven't.
But yeah,
No.
it really reminds me of this in a lot of ways. Also, your other book, the Art of Being a the Art of Being a Man, he reminds me of Zarathustra, Nietzsche's Zarathustra,
Mm,
that Übermensch, that figure, that life affirming, that who exhibits participation. Out of strength, he brings in the lesser man for it to make, try to encourage them to participate. There's so many different strings there that I see echoes of. But anyway, well, sticking with that, talking about the responsible who exhibits a gratitude and participation, is there a, I'm assuming there are instances where the resentful can also exhibit those characteristics, but probably in a lesser way, in a less consistent way, or do they exhibit those at all?
they don't. If they do, it's a mask. It's a
Right,
false
okay.
front,
You mean
right?
like a narcissist, like a psychopath?
Well, we need to be careful because there are narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths that are both on the resentfuls and the responsible side. It's a matter of how they're tuned.
Mm,
What do they do with that personality type? Now, the borderline personality, Schedule A and Schedule B, those all tend to be on the resentful side. Not tend to, they're all on the resentful side and in the adoptables, right?
hmm
But narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths are on both sides, and you have to because you have to have equal, like to fight like, right?
hmm
Like to counter like. Again, it's a matter of how they're tuned. And that tuning starts at a very young age, and really more than likely is, Jonathan Haidt and others are really working out more than likely 90% of they were born that way.
Wow. So you're telling me that you're either born a resentful or you're born irresponsible, and there's nothing you can really
Yes.
do.
No.
Wow.
Now, if you're an adoptable, You can work on that. You can work on adapting, but you're still going to be by nature oriented a little more towards responsibility or resentment.
Wow, that's very insightful. What do you think of terms like alpha and beta? They're thrown around a lot nowadays, online. Do you think they're useful terms? Are they only useful for like the animal kingdom? Are they useful for categorizations of humans?
Well, they're absolutely essential. The problem is that the way in which they're articulated are completely and fundamentally wrong.
Why so?
Generally, what they do is they articulate the alpha as an A-type personality. An A-type personality is not an alpha. I've written this. I wrote a book called Starving for Leadership. Um, and I've written on this very topic and thought about it quite considerably. But A-types are just aggressive. No, I'm going to pause. I'm going to say they are aggressive betas because that's what they are in the modern parlance of alphas and betas. But in actual social species, of which we are, in the primate family, but in social species, betas are not what they're articulated now. Betas are articulated as this pejorative, lesser being. In reality, in all social species, the betas are the ones that raise the young. They do the hunting, they do the fighting, they do all of the skills, the hard skills necessary for the pack, the tribe, the troop, or whatever it is to survive. The alpha is the one that manages internal, conflict amongst, the stronger pack mates or tribe mates while also fighting alphas in other packs, tribes, etc. That's the alpha's role. And to be a model and example of, you want to try and be like this. You probably so in actual animal studies, again, we are an animal, the betas are actually solid. We need to stop thinking in terms of a beta as a lesser thing. That's not true,
Hmm.
right? The betas are the ones that do all the heavy lifting in social species. Now, an A-type personality is what we call alphas now, like this creep Andrew Tate and others. That's not an alpha. That's like the furthest thing from an alpha that there is. That's a
Why do you say that? Why do you think that?
because there's no real strength or power there at all. That's bluster.
Hmm.
It's puffing up bluster. So I wrote a piece called Alpha-Based Leadership. Alphas are actual alphas. And if you watch them, this is what started me when I was young, was raising horses and stock and animals, etc., and watching this behavior and then reading things, etc. Um, if you look at the actual alpha, they are example-based leadership. They don't use bluster. They don't make threats. They're not beating people up. They're not puffing themselves up at all. If you look at the alpha, they're usually pretty mellow, pretty
Hmm.
calm, laid back. If they ever do have to, strike at something or use some force or aggression, it's very precise, it's very deliberate, and then it's over.
Yeah.
They don't, right? And they don't puff themselves up. They don't anything. The only time they ever puff themselves up is when they're facing another alpha and they have to fight. And oh, by the way, that's alpha males and females. Alpha females also don't walk around peacocky.
Well, how would you describe an alpha female? Oh, what I
The
like
healthy
what
matriarch, the healthy
Yep.
matriarchs, like we were talking about,
Hmm. Wow.
right? The healthy matriarch is someone who understands the importance of partnering with an alpha male and also understands the organic status hierarchies, which is what we're really talking about, and how to, if you look at alpha females like wolves, like I grew up around wolves and studying wolves, et cetera, high up in the mountains in the north of the United States, northwest of the United States. If you look at an alpha female, when there's a fight, she'll duck down beneath him. And people used to think that's her cowering. No, no, no. She's protecting his throat,
Okay.
right? And if you look at alpha female, and I'm going to use wolves, but also horses, they are the ones who keep the females in check. They maintain the balance of the disparities in the social hierarchies amongst the females.
Hmm.
They're also the ones that that in different ways select the females that the alpha breeds with.
In your book, The Art of Being a Man, you mention the females a lot, and I get the impression that they complement the man. And all, like in other, I like when I picked up the book, I was, I had kind of like this expectation that I was just going to be the man is it, the man is the be and end all. But in that book, you bring in the female a lot, and you get a real sense that, you know, she makes the man. Would you say that women are more powerful than men? Is that would that be a
Women have always been the power.
ha-
Women have always been the power. They will always be the power for all kinds of statistical reasons, biological reasons, etc. Women are the continuity. Women choose. And this is why we're having all these societal problems, etc. right now, is because women have been convinced that there are no social status hierarchies, and so their choice metrics are all over the place, and they're trying to choose men that are way outside their social class.
because of the internet?
Because of the internet, and actually, no, we're old enough that it really started in education. This was intentionally done starting in the 1960s and really taking off in the 1970s, 80s, and then unbelievably in the 2000s. It was this intentional, you know, Marxist minded, but this goes way beyond, this isn't about Marxism. This is what resentfuls do. Women are, at all levels, women are wired for genetic warfare from the moment they're born to the moment they die.
Mm.
Every moment of a woman's life, as pre-children, then as a mother, then as a grandmother, or maybe even a great grandmother, every moment of her life is wired for female versus female genetic competition. You can see that in all social species, by the way, not just humans.
So you see their biggest competition, their biggest antagonists are other women.
They're only now they have predators in the form of, weaker, lesser males, but they're only competitors. Their only peer competitors are women.
Mm. And they do it with such subtlety. When you see
Yeah.
when you watch two women and they're going against each other, they don't do it as overtly as two men. They're very, very subtle, and the dynamic is almost invisible, but yet it's
Yeah.
there, you know.
Look at who, when we were doing witch burnings, which we still do witch burnings, we just don't use fire and wood anymore. Right? We do canceling, and I watched. I'm single father raising a teen daughter, and I've watched since she was little. Incredible young lady, incredible. I've watched since she was little how other women, including much older women, like principals of the school and teachers, went after her anytime she showed any spark of individuality and capability and capacity and leadership specifically.
Mm.
And my daughter, I 7, 8. We came back from Japan. She was 7, 8 years old and went into school here in America, and she would defend other girls. Her dad's a Green Beret. She grew up around Green Berets at war, in a time of war. And and the other kids are Green Berets, and we're all protectors by nature. And so she would literally step in with some other girl, even some boys were getting picked on and beat up. She'd step in and stop it. Who got in trouble? She did.
Mm.
Power system came after her time and time again. Every single one of those people in that power structure were women. And they saw a bright young lady who had this extraordinary capacities, and they had to shut that shit down. I watched it in Afghanistan, right? I was taught, the Islamic world is all this patriarchy and stuff. No, 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 no. Every one of the girls that were getting picked on, every one of the girls that was getting, suppressed was getting suppressed because, three women in the village or the community had decided that young girl was getting uppity and she needed to be put in her place.
That is incredible. My wife is a teacher, and she always says she much prefers working around men than other female teachers.
Every
She
woman I know in the business world, finance world, every world says the same thing,
Mhm. Do you
right?
think do you think women mature? You said that a man comes really into his full in his 50s. Is it the same with women? Are they earlier?
No, no. women are lot well, women do advance and grow and expand too. So I don't want to say that, but as a man grow, when as men, because of our primary role is violence, as we age, and the proper use of violence in defense and protection of the world of woman, right? The role of the world of man is the management of assets and, all of the higher level abstraction stuff that usually comes with the woman and her family and the safety and security, physical safety and security and preservation of all. That's violent, that and it's the only real currency of a people is the violent capacities and capabilities of its men and how well they use that currency,
Mhm.
right? So because of that, men go through these. I don't know if you know the term eigenvalue
No, I
from
don't. No, I don't.
physics, well, it's basically an energetic step change, right?
Mhm.
Or complexity step change, et cetera. So I won't use it. But point being is that a man about if he lives long enough, is going to go through five major transitions. And those five, and I just had this conversation earlier today, um, strangely enough, but those five major transitions are based off of his physicality and his ability to actually conduct physical violence.
Mhm.
And as he ages, we call it maturation. But what he's really doing is each time he goes to the next stage, right, the next step of physical capacities, he's maturing in that he's becoming far more sophisticated in his depth of understanding of how and when and, what, how, and when to use violence,
Mhm.
which is in direct inverse proportion to his ability to actually physically conduct it.
As we get
Women
older,
don't go through this. There's only two major transitions for women from non-child rearing capacities to
mhm.
child rearing capacities, and then from child rearing capacities to non-child rearing capacities again. Those are the only two major changes women go through.
Mm.
Now, there's a
And
lot goes on in there, right? And that's a lot of sophisticated, complex stuff. And,
mhm.
I've watched that too. But a man goes through five, if he lives long enough, into his 60s. He's going to go, well, into his 70s or 80s. He's going to go through five major fundamental changes. A woman's going to go through two.
Mm. The you mentioned that you were a Green Beret and you were in Afghanistan. I'm sure you saw your fair share of violence and you've been through a lot yourself. Do you want to maybe share maybe an anecdote or something that happened there that you found maybe transformative or insightful, something that gave something that maybe elevated your own self in your own journey of masculinity and being a man?
Yeah, unfortunately, I started in violence from time I was just very young, mother. Um, and I watched violence from time, murder, and I saw murder when I was a kid right in front of me, et cetera. And then my own brother turned to violence and, very, very aggressive violence. And then he was shot and killed before he was 21. And
Oh.
so I've known these things, but the truly transformative thing is what I already mentioned was this having this illusion that there's this patriarchal system out there and it's all powerful, and then coming to realize the patriarchal system it was a shield, it was a mask worn by unhealthy, nasty nasty, women with power in communities and how they used, if the women couldn't crush this, bright young lady who might become a threat to them someday and their power systems and structures, if they couldn't suppress her, then they would use some man to do it and they would goad him and push him and pressure him or use relationships and resources that came with her because patrilineal lines rarely make it past three generations unbroken. Matrilineal lines can go 30, 100, mother to daughter to daughter to daughter. So virtually all power in the history of the world, everywhere, always, even in these quote unquote patriarchal societies, is all female power.
Mm.
They put the there's healthy matriarchs develop a patriarchy that is as a partner, right? A binding and partnering of the world of man and the world of women, and they bind men, good quality, capable men to them, and not through sex, but through relationships, access. If you look historically, there's a whole lot of the great men in history who, if you look at who their wives were, you're like, oh. Now, the man had to be capable and he had to be able to do these things, but her family came with the resources. Her family came with the relationships. Her family came with, you know, 300 years of knowledge and experience that gave him that added benefit, bonus, capability, or not capability, but he was able to take his capacities and use that base from the wife's family or the mother's family and go much farther. It's women, very capable women who decide which men rise up in status hierarchies.
Mm.
Now, that's not in the world of man because the world of man is determined by men, right? But a man backed by a healthy matriarch and her relationships and her resources and her know-how and her family and that old system, that man's going to go farther in the world of man.
Mm.
In an unhealthy matriarchy, right, which is like Afghan, you know, much of the Islamic world, and I won't say all of it because it's not all that way, but and the old Christian world, by the way, um, or at least parts of it. Um, the unhealthy matriarchs bind to them generally through sex, and that's why you get so many of these predatory males. It's why they got the child brides. That's why that's all women doing that. They're bribing unhealthy men through sex to be the physical shield and to be the artificial status hierarchy system put out in front so that the world and community and everybody's looking at these horrible men and they're not looking at the women behind all of it.
Do women go through a ritual the same way that most men should, or most men don't actually, but
They
in the
don't,
Western,
yeah.
but do women go through some ritualistic experience in order to become a woman?
Yeah, what a great question. I wrote another book called A Modern Knight's Guidebook, which goes into the manhood, what needs to go into a manhood ritual for men. And a man can take himself through one, but it's going to be a ball buster, right? It's going to take many days and nearly break it. With respect to women, in healthy matriarchies, the womanhood ritual is her first child.
Hmm.
It fundamentally, physiologically, neurologically, socially, structurally, in every other way, change. If she's a healthy woman and she's in a healthy matriarchy, she is now welcomed into the sisterhood, you know, the sisterhood of mothers. And she's now earned her status as a woman. Now she's got to go on from there and help raise the child right and raise the child in the society and the civilization and you know all these more really complex things that women do because she's got to raise her child to be male or female to be engaged in the eternal war and play the infinite game and deal with this female versus female competition that goes on even in healthy matriarchies. Like that competition doesn't go away. It just changes face. In unhealthy matriarchies, women don't get that womanhood ritual because they're just birthing a child to sacrifice for the unholy sisterhood, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
depending on where that woman is, that female, you know, they just bore a child, depending on what level of status their society is, she's lower status. She's only bearing children to sacrifice them in war, in hard labor, in, well, you know, all the trans stuff now and the, you know, all the woke stuff, et cetera. That's
Mhm.
human sacrifices. That's child sacrifices in these unhealthy matriarchs.
It is evil on a very profound level when when you put it like that.
Hmm.
It removes the layer, that veneer of pretense. When these when they put their, their children, their girls up
Yeah.
like that, it really is, it boggles the
Well,
mind.
it's why they feed them into these predatory networks. It's, the Epstein trafficking and all of that. People really need to take a step back. You want to know who's the one that's doing most of the trafficking, management for trafficking? It's women. Look at the brothels around the world. Look at the recruiting systems around the world for
the
these girls, the
stereotypical.
grooming. It's not the men. The men are the customers. The
Yeah.
systems, most all of these trafficking, sex trafficking. And by the way, it's not just girls they sex traffic. Over half of the people trafficked for sex are boys. And why don't know why nobody talks about that? That's never spoken about, but it's a fact all over the world.
Mm.
Half of so roughly 19% of people trafficked or trafficked for sex. Little over half of those are males. Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, I saw a documentary recently about children being trafficked, and you're absolutely right because I think it was for Colombia or somewhere, and one of the heads was actually a woman. It was a woman who was
Yes.
doing it.
Yes.
But- yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. Just talking about what do you think of the internet? Because you see, like we're on the internet now. What do you think its impact has been on us as like I remember the time, of course the 90s and the 80s, well, I was born in 1975, but I remember those decades without a phone, without the internet, and of course then in the noughties and the early 2010s where it was becoming more and more prevalent. I can see the effect it's had on myself. But what do you think the overall effect has been, EM?
It's the same, just 100 times more as the introduction of the printing press in the 1400s.
Which
It's,
which was a good thing, the printing press, no?
oh, it was horrible.
Really? Well, why
It
do you
was
say that?
necessary, but well, it unleashed 300 years of nonstop war.
Hmm.
300 years of nonstop war. Why?
You mean you
Because, mhm.
with the Protestant Reformation, do you mean, or
Well, that came along later, right? But, well, I mean, it's around the same, somewhat Protestant Reformation. It wasn't so much about the Protestant versus Catholic divide is an artificial BS. What was down underneath is that these old systems and structures of ways of being that were built around certain repositories and interpretations of information were blown out of the water when there were all these books. And more importantly, all these, newspapers and pamphlets and things that, through all of human history prior was never possible. And now you get this widespread dissemination, and you get a heavy emphasis on initially on the priestly class and the judicial class on literacy, and being literate, and then that spread to the masses. What happened now, we get this massive amount of new ideas and different interpretations of old ideas, and it just completely throws an information bomb into these populations that had come to some kind of a balance over centuries.
Hmm.
And so now everything that had been fought out by the ancestors in the past had to be refought out. Well, that's what's happening now.
Do you see
Yeah.
the same thing happening with the internet?
It's the same thing. What's happening right now is somewhere around 2008 through 2012, we had our Tower of Babel event. Too much information that upended everything in question, brought everything into question. And then you have the resentfuls, back to the early part of this conversation, that are fueling all of that because they want to break everything so that they can create their total control system or their total slave or genocidal system, depending on what flavor of resentful you are.
Are they winning, EM? Do you think they're winning at the moment?
They're 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 not winning as much as they were 4 years ago, or even, yeah, I would say about 2 years ago. They're not winning as much as they were. They're not losing though. And
Hmm.
that's the thing, right? In the English speaking world specifically, we have a 400-year great cycle. You know the Strauss and Howe model, the saeculums every 80 years, the
No.
four seasons. Oh, I'd highly recommend a book called The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe.
Okay.
Okay. But Strauss and Howe articulate that there's, four generations in a saeculum. The ancient Greeks talked about this thousands of years ago.
Hmm.
And so I won't go down too much, but point being is that in the English civilization, every five of these saeculums, 400 years, we go through a total knockdown, drag out. Everything's broken, everything's questioned, everything's looked at. And then we piece things together in a far, on the other side of a bloody, straight up bloody conflict. We so far have always reconstructed the best parts of our English civilization that goes back to Alfred the Great in the 800s and really back to Rome 400 years before, the Rome leaving. And before that, 400 years, Rome arriving, and 400 years, we don't know before that because we didn't really have records. But for whatever reason, in the English speaking peoples, every 400 years, we go through this massive fight. And so far, again, going all the way back to the 800s specifically, we've always come back to our civilization, the core tenets of our civilization. We've restructured the balance of power, and we as a civilizational peoples, which the English-speaking peoples are, and that does include the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, the Cornish, there's no English, but the Wessex, the Anglians, the Wessex, the Northumbrians, etc., right?
Hmm.
The Picts, the Gales, the Britannies, all of that. So far, for 1,200 years, now we're right up at it. We're at 400 years. 400 years ago was the English Civil War and the Inglorious Revolution. 400 years before that was the Magna Carta. 400 years before that was the establishment of England, right? 400 years before that was Rome leaving and we having to reorganize ourselves on the islands ourselves. And 400 years before that, Rome showed up, right? So we are at that place right now, and interesting, it's coinciding with this maximum internet saturation,
Hmm.
right? But the everything that happened in the 1600s that we've all been living in since, that all happened, all that structural transitional stuff happened in the 1600s. All of that was set in motion by the printing press. And now in the 1400s, 200 years before, now the internet is the speed of light and it's global. So that all accelerates, right? So the internet comes out 20 some odd years ago, 25 years ago, and we've gone through all the iterations and all the chaos and everything else globally in 25 years that it took 200 years to do with the printing press.
Yeah, there has been a pretty rapid advance of knowledge and information. Do you think do you think constructs like you were talking about religion just a while ago, constructs like Catholicism and Protestantism and Islam, do you think they're handy? They're Christian.
I
Do you
think
think
they're all made up. I think they're all resentfuls made up constructs.
what do you think of Islam? What do you think of Islam? Is
I
there
think it's totally made up. I think it's made up by the same people I think made up Christianity 300 years before that because they needed an antipode. Because it turned out, what is Christianity? Christianity is virtualized Roman Empire. I
but
write about this in my novel, As Rome Burns. The great innovation of Constantine was that he realized that if Rome was to endure, it had to virtualize. It couldn't be in the position, it couldn't be in the presence of one man that could be murdered regularly, and couldn't be in the form of geographical land because that could be conquered and taken at times. So if you wanted Rome to endure, you had to turn it into an idea, a concept that would then promulgate without the need for legions, without the need for, hard sustenance of land or protection and security of land, and without the need to, you know, even if your house guard knifed the emperor in the back, the empire wasn't going to come down. And so the creation of Christianity was the perfect way to do that. Let's embed Roman society, civilization, and structure into this ideological religious belief system, and let's set that free. And what is that? Well, that's a self-healing mesh network.
Mhm.
And Roman Catholicism was a fight because Roman Catholicism didn't come along till 1054. when they broke in the 1054 schism from the Orthodox world
Mm-hmm.
and launched Rome 2.0 as the Holy Roman Church.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went to war for the next 400 years with the Orthodox world. The Crusades were not about Islam. 90% of the kingdoms and principalities destroyed were all Orthodox Christian, including
Really?
the sacking. Oh yeah, including the sacking of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade
I
and the
thought the
creation of.
I thought the Crusades were all about it, about
Nope, nope. This was Rome. This was Rome. Rome gaining vengeance on Constantinople for the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312.
hmm. I was listening to an interview with Richard Dawkins, and he said he's not a Christian. He doesn't believe in one word of Christianity. However, he said that he's a cultural Christian, and he sees the importance of having that construct, I guess, the Christian construct in society, especially now with so many Muslims coming into England. Well, how how would you respond to
I
that?
don't.
Do you
English civilization is only partially Christian. English civilization is Scandinavian, Britannic, Celtic, pagan, and
so
our
you
Christian.
mhm.
Mhm.
So you would attach more importance to the pagan aspect.
Yes, yeah, the Germanic peoples and the Celtic peoples. It's Norse. I'm Norman, right? My father's English, my mother's Scottish, and I am Norse Norman on both sides of the family, both the Scottish and we didn't get there permanently, the major parts of the family till 1066 in that little kerfluffle, right,
Mhm,
at Hastings. Um, Give me one second.
mhm,
I do not in any form or fashion. I went to Christian schools. I went to Catholic boarding schools. I went to Seventh-day Adventist boarding schools and private schools and then finished the last couple of years in public school. Um, I am not opposed or antagonistic Christianity. However, back to, Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, they both articulated almost 200 years ago or 200 some odd years ago that you know, Christianity was killed.
mhm,
We killed Christianity in the not so much the Renaissance or the Enlightenment, as people say, because neither of those actually, if you look, were anti-Christian, right? What killed Christianity was the 300 years of war and the replacement of Christianity with financialism, which is what the religion that's been worshipped since. It hasn't been Christianity. It's been this hijacked thing called financialism. I've written on that numerous times. Um, So give me one second. If you look at Germanic peoples and the peoples of the British Isles, and I don't like the term British because that's the occupiers' term for us, but the English peoples, again, all of us, the
mhm,
English-speaking peoples, you will find that the far vast majority of the Christianity that we worship is one far more like earlier Orthodoxy than Catholicism, despite the Catholics at one point owning almost 70% of the revenue generating properties in the British Isles, which is why Henry VIII kicked them out, not because of wives. Um, Also, if you look at the form of the variant and structure of Christianity that did take hold in the British Isles, it is far, if you look at the rituals, the structures, the adherences, etc., they're all laid right down on top of pagan systems.
mhm,
Paganism's always, classical Norse, Celtic, Britannic paganism is in Celtic or Gaelic paganism has always been with us. It's with us today. Now, there's a problem with that because that's what's been used to corrupt the Anglican Church is this misapprobation about what paganism is.
mhm.
Paganism isn't about anything goes. It isn't about child sacrifices or human, none of that stuff. That was all painted on us by frickin' the Roman Catholic Church. It's about a deep, deep, deep connection and resonance with the land and the people of the land and the life of the land.
Mhm. with the gods of the land, with the spirit
with the
of the
gods of
land.
the lands. It's that mystical, and it's a unique thing. This is why the Europeans, the continental Europeans and the Catholics have been coming, and the hardcore, Christian folks have been coming so hard against destruction of the English speaking peoples, is because we as a people, even today, 1,000 years on, and 300 some odd years after we were conquered by, the financialists who took the crown. They didn't have to conquer the people, they just have to hold the crown, and they've been holding it since 1688.
Mhm.
Um, when Because we betrayed our king, King Charles I, who was actually a damn good guy trying to fight for us, and Cromwell came along, and many years later, Cromwell realized His Majesty King Charles, who he'd beheaded, had actually been right and did exactly what King Charles had been asking for. Right? He realized that Charles had been right. But the point I'm getting at is that even today, the reason, deep down reason why they are flooding our lands and peoples and places with foreigners who will never be us is because the English-speaking people still hold a very deep resonance with the lands and the people, the native peoples of the lands and the gods of the lands and the power and the force and the energy and however you want to articulate it.
Mhm.
We are by nature English-speaking peoples, all of us, the English, Wessexians, but the English, the Scots, the Irish, the Welsh, the Cornish, the the East Anglians, etc. The Northumbrians, we are a very, very in tune, spiritually in tune with the land peoples. It's riddled throughout our language, throughout our cultural practices, our civilization. So while I understand what folks are saying, Peterson and Dawkins and these others, they're not seeing what they need to see. Nietzsche was right. Dostoevsky is right. Those old Abrahamic beliefs, which were probably made up anyways, at least that's my understanding and the understanding of others, are done. What we need to go back to is our civilization. Our civilization is 1,000 right now in the form and variant that we have of the English-speaking people's civilization, again, to include you Irish, most certainly, right?
Mhm.
Is uh is 1,000, it's 1,200 years old, but the genesis of that goes back thousands of years.
Mhm.
Thousands of years. What we might need to bring back, and I wrote a book called This Our English Civilization, a
Mhm.
collection of essays. What these guys are pointing at is not actually Christianity, because the things that they're pointing at as Christianity actually come out of our civilization and far older beliefs and practices of how we organize ourselves. Our ancient ancestors weren't just thug barbarians that walked around and beat each other over the head and dragged women out by the hair. We would never have been peoples like that don't last very long. We had been figuring out very sophisticated, complex ways to work out all of this complexities of interpersonal relationships for thousands of years. That's all coded into our civilization. Christianity came in later as a parasitic system and laid down right on top of that. So what they're pointing at is not Christianity. It's English civilization. And continental European civilization and English civilization are not the same.
What is the difference between continental European civilized? Like I live in Spain now, for example, and I'm Irish. I know exactly what you mean about Ireland.
Yeah,
The way it's part of
yeah,
let's just say as you said, the English
yeah,
speaking
yeah.
Isles. But I know exactly what you mean. I was talking to James Tunney there
Mm,
a few months ago, and he said that he feels that the gods of Ireland have left. I was asking him, and he said that he feels like when he goes back to Ireland, he doesn't feel that connection anymore. He
yes,
said he put it that I think the gods are not there anymore. So that he didn't feel that connection. Is this what you mean?
that's it. Yes, no, 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 that's exactly it. So the English-speaking peoples as a civilization developed in direct refutation to continental European peoples. Continental European peoples are a top-down civil law structured system. It's about set tables of rules and laws and prescriptions. The English-speaking peoples are based around common law. Common law was codified in the Doings of Alfred by His Majesty King Alfred, but common law in practice in the Northwest Germanic, peoples, which includes Scandinavians, the island, all of us islanders, etc. We're down underneath Germanic peoples, right? And Jutland and all of that before. Our civilization, our peoples are not prescriptive set structures and rules and laws. Now that's what they're getting to now as they're trying to become more like continental Europeans. But we've always had a flexible common law structure and system of how we organize ourselves because we understand, we, the English speaking peoples, and again, the Northwest Germanic peoples who are very different than the South and Eastern Germanic peoples. We're fundamentally different ethnic groups, etc. For us, we've always had a more fluid bottom up organization. Why? Because we grew up in our ancestors had to survive with far more cohesiveness right down to the smallest group because of the numbers of month of a year of winter and how we had to organize and coordinate ourselves around making sure in that narrow window we had to prepare nutritionally, energy for the winter, to coordinate and organize so we could survive through the winter. We had to be able to organize ourselves there, and that's more fluid. You can't set this, and this because everything's changing. The other piece is even more importantly is that we had to also be able to socially survive long winters in which we were locked down together in pretty close proximity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So peoples who come from these northern colder latitudes that don't have as much access to resources and natural the inputs necessary like the folks that live in the Mediterranean area, we had to have a more fluid, you know we had to have a far more cohesive peoples, and to do that you can't have hardcore prescriptive rules and laws. It doesn't work for, you need unbelievably mass amounts of power. You have to force that to work. And we couldn't do that because, again, because of the winters and the necessity to survive our winters, we had to, the high man and the low man had to actually be closer social structure wise than in these other kinds of systems where they had, access to a whole lot more resources. They didn't have as harsh of winters. They didn't have to spend as much time in real close proximity during the winters, etc. So this is the fundamental difference for the English speaking peoples and the Northwest Germanic peoples, which were all the same. We're the same peoples as, peoples in other regions. This is why also we and the Russians are way more like each other than
I
anybody
was
else.
I was just about to say that.
Mm,
I was just about to say when you were talking about the long winters,
hmm.
that we all had to like, kind of like get into this kind of like coherence
Yeah,
spotlight. I was just about to say, well, what about Russia? Don't they go through the same thing? You just
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what can you go into that a bit? What were you just about to say?
Well,
That we're the same as Russians
we're
or what?
very similar to the Russians now, and that's the other thing. Who are the Russians? They're Kievan Rus. Who are they? Vikings.
Hmm.
Swedish Vikings went east along the rivers and the Volga and etc. Norwegian and Danish, the Danes and the Norse, they went west and south. So
Hmm.
Russians, now they mixed with Slavic peoples from the Caucasus and elsewhere and others, but Russians are Kievan Rus. They started in Kiev,
Hmm.
Ukraine. Now it's called Ukraine now. It wasn't then, right? Ukraine is a made-up thing in the 20th century. Um, Give me a second. We and the Russian peoples are the same damn peoples. Now they intermixed with the Slavs, and we intermixed with, the Celts and the Britannies and the Picts.
Hmm.
But we and the Russians, the English-speaking peoples, the Scandinavian peoples, the Northwest Germanic peoples, and the Western Russian peoples, the actual core of the Russian peoples, we all come from the same root, and not 20,000 years ago, 1,300 years ago,
Hmm.
right? Which is
Yeah.
nothing, in population and geologic time.
And when you're saying about the English speaking civilization, would you put them as, well, obviously they don't speak English, but would you count them in that civilization as well? Even
Russians
though.
are no, they're not. Their Russian civilization did develop uniquely.
Hmm.
It's also why the Russians were able to survive the communists that we sent in there because we did that.
You mean the Bolsheviks?
The Bolsheviks, yeah.
What
So, and
what
we
what?
also, the British occupiers of the English-speaking peoples, the British occupiers are continental Europeans.
Hmm.
Um, the we attempted to coup, in the Russian Revolution and take over. The whites were actually winning the revolution, the Civil War
Hmm.
and the loyalist, right? The Romanov loyalist. And so we sent Lenin and Trotsky with a bunch of money, I think the equivalent of $40 million or something, back into Russia on German railroads. We sent them in there to plus up the Bolsheviks to make sure that the Reds won. And then we propped up the Soviets all the way through Stalin and really into the 60s and 70s. We propped them up to try and end the Russian civilization.
Hmm.
It didn't work. They survived. Why? Because they went back to their because they were a civilizational people and they recognized themselves as a civilizational people. And that's when they were ready to turn that back on, it turned on back on like that.
As what it's doing today, I guess, in a way.
Correct. Well, now it's just getting further strengthened. Right now we've locked it in by trying to wipe them out by sending 2 million of what they consider to be their brothers and sisters, Ukrainians. We we sent 2 million Ukrainian men roughly to their slaughter.
Mm.
And about 150,000, 160,000 Russian men have died too. So we're over 2 million Slavs and Russians, Slavic and, Kievan Russian peoples is probably a better way of saying it. We're over 2 million dead in 3 years. They're never going to forget that. They will never, ever let their civilization, well, I mean, I can't say ever, ever, right? But it's going to be a long damn time before anybody ever can convince even the lowest status Russian to turn against their civilization.
Mhm. When you say, Ian, that we are sending them to their deaths, do you mean the financiers, the financialists? Or
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and through the governments, the puppet governments that they own here and in the United Kingdom.
Right, I got you. The well, Ian, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I hope I can do this again with you sometime. I could literally listen to you for 3 hours. Um, so Ian, where can people find you? Where can people find your stuff? By the way, guys, I'm gonna have all these links in the description of this video. If you go down in the description, you're going to see all these links. But is there any?
Yeah. So Ian Burlingame at substack.com. The one I do articles periodically, as you a reference, but there's a novel there that I've been releasing serial fashion, which is the old way. It's
Mhm.
called Azrael Burns. If people want to dig into these things more deeply, going back 800 years in a fictional narrative story kind of way, I would recommend that. E.M. Burlingame on Twitter. I'm fairly prolific there. Just know that every once in a while I'll have a little nip of the scotch or a good bottle of wine, and I might swear and be a little more loquacious. Um, Cantankerous, I think is the right term. But there's a lot of things on Twitter. That's kind of my primary interface. And then we're getting ready to launch an alternate reality game to try and kind of flesh out the Shoulder and Giants world that the novel's in and see if we can't, bring more of these concepts and ideas. If we cannot resuscitate our civilizations, it isn't just the English civilization that needs to be restored. It's the Spanish civilization, and they are, and it's the Frankish civilization, and they are, and it's the German civilization, and you know, the Germanic civilization, and all of our civilizations need to be dusted off, brought forward, and or we're not going to make it as a people,
Mhm.
right? And our
Yeah.
solution, our English solution, isn't going to work for the Germans. It's not going to work for the Franks. It's not going to work for the Hellenes, the Hellenistic, Greek peoples. And it's our civilizations are different.
Mhm.
So
EM, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you, sir.
thank you.